Then, Arlo now stands upright, looking directly at John Doe, who returns his gaze with a slight, confident smirk. John Doe's eyes remain fixed in an intense stare, his brow furrowed and a bead of sweat visible as he speaks with unwavering resolve. Arlo raises his head, his eyes narrowing with a fierce, unwavering glare as he faces John Doe directly. John lowers his gaze, his eyes still intense, as faint marks and perspiration hint at the lingering tension from their confrontation. John's face shows visible tension, with a bead of sweat tracing down his cheek as the intense confrontation continues. The student's hand firmly grips the door handle, pulling it shut after the intense confrontation. Moments later, the student stands with his face obscured by his messy hair, his posture suggesting a moment of quiet reflection. Arlo looks stern, his eyes narrowed and brows furrowed, as he processes the intense confrontation. A beat later, Arlo stands quietly, his head slightly bowed. Without warning, Arlo intently gazes down, his eyes visible as he holds a dark object in his hand. At that moment, Arlo's intense blue eye is visible, with a sweat drop near his temple, reflecting the ongoing tension of the confrontation. Ventus walks through the school hallway, holding a red can, his expression calm as other students pass by as silhouettes. His eyes narrow with intense focus, his brow furrowed as a powerful aura emanates from him, reflecting the ongoing tension. Arlo tilts his head back, taking a drink from a red can, his blonde hair visible as he hydrates. Blake's red eyes glare intensely to the side, his golden spiky hair framing a determined expression as he looks on. Ventus, startled, spits out his drink upon seeing Arlo appear in the hallway, a speak of the devil moment unfolding. Arlo's spiky blonde hair frames his face as his blue eyes narrow, a stern and focused expression on his face amidst the tension. Then, Arlo watches intently as Isin, looking startled, frantically runs through the school hallway, attempting to escape. Ventus grimaces intensely, a sweat drop on his temple, while Gavin smiles faintly in the background, seemingly unaffected by the tension. Blake glares intensely, a sweat drop on his temple, reacting with clear frustration as Arlo's blonde hair is visible behind him. Without warning, Arlo, looking annoyed, gestures dismissively as Isin, wide-eyed and panicked, crushes a quill in his hand. Blake, with a frustrated expression and sweat on his temple, shushes Arlo, who stands with his back to the viewer. A startled Isin clutches a crushed cup, questioning the situation, while Arlo smirks, arms crossed, implying Isin had no choice. Isin looks up with a startled expression and sweat drops, as the other student playfully makes a peace sign near his face. Arlo smirks slyly, making a peace sign with his hand, a faint blush on his cheek. Without warning, Arlo, tense and with intense eyes, looks fiercely determined, guaranteeing a front-page article. Blake gives a confident thumbs up, looking assertively towards Arlo, who returns a sly, knowing smirk. His subtle smirk lingers, a faint blush still visible on his cheek as he looks away. Ventus waves goodbye, his hand animated with a wave effect as Arlo walks away in the background. Arlo's face is completely flushed red with embarrassment, sweat beading on his forehead as he forces a weak, blank smile, looking utterly flustered. Ventus sits intently at a desk, typing on his laptop, his expression obscured by his hair as he works. Blake stares intensely, his eyes narrowed and eyebrows furrowed, a subtle blush on his cheeks, showing strong emotion. John Doe offers a gentle, subtle smile, his expression calm and relaxed after his work. A character with an eye patch smirks, declaring they'll track someone to their roots, while Blake observes nearby. Arlo stares intensely, his eyes glowing and brows furrowed, fiercely determined as he prepares to act. The boy shouts in distress, his face obscured by his hair, as Blake stands beside him with a confident, slightly mischievous smirk. Blake looks intently to the side, his eye focused with a serious, contemplative expression. A beat later, Blake stares intently, his golden eyes narrowed and brows furrowed, conveying a serious and determined expression as he focuses. Moments later, Blake, with his spiky red hair and golden eyes, shouts in frustration, his brows furrowed in anger. Then, Blake stares intently, his red hair framing his face as his golden eyes focus with a determined expression. Blake, with his red hair, smiles gently, eyes closed, as he holds a drink and reassures the other student. At that moment, Blake looks back with a slight smile, holding his phone, while Holden works on a laptop at the counter. His intense red eye, glowing with a golden iris, is wide and focused, a sweat drop visible on his cheek. Blake's eyes glow a vibrant red, his brows furrowed in a determined and intense expression, a bead of sweat forming. Blake's intense red eye, with its golden iris, is fixed forward, his expression serious as he processes a new revelation. Blake's red eyes are wide with fury, his brow furrowed as he reacts to the shocking revelation about John Doe. A tear rolls down John Doe's cheek, his face etched with profound sadness and a few beads of sweat. John Doe is partially visible, marking a moment of transition. Arlo looks on with a subtle, knowing expression, as if observing the unfolding situation. John Doe watches as a thought about someone's presence crosses his mind. A beat later, Arlo stands with his hands in his pockets, looking downcast, as a voice apologetically states he really wanted to talk. At that moment, Arlo looks down, his hand resting on a surface, as he makes a quiet plea. John Doe stands fully visible, facing a partially seen Arlo, as he earnestly continues to make his point. John looks down with a pensive expression, his eyes reflecting the weight of the moment as he considers the plea. Arlo stands against the fence, appearing surprised, as he makes a small exclamation. John looks down with a pensive expression, his eyes reflecting a quiet contemplation after his plea. Arlo listens intently, a speech bubble suggesting he's speaking. John Doe looks down, appearing contrite or uncomfortable as he responds to Arlo. At that moment, Arlo looks up with a stern, impatient expression, his eyes narrowed as he utters, "Hurry up and say what you need to say." John Doe, now looking directly at someone, gestures as he begins to express his gratitude for something. John reacts with a tense, slightly uncomfortable expression, a bead of sweat highlighting his unease during the conversation. John, seen from behind, admits he overreacted, stating he wasn't himself. Arlo calmly agrees with him. Moments later, Arlo questions the other student, who looks away nervously, with a tense expression, as their conversation continues. John Doe's nervous expression underscores his discomfort as he continues to avoid eye contact. Arlo's eyes narrow slightly, his expression still thoughtful and skeptical as he listens to John Doe. Then, Arlo's eyes narrow sternly as he makes a firm statement, asserting that 4 people cannot gang up on 1 person. A beat later, Arlo looks forward with a thoughtful expression, his eyes focused, as he continues to process the conversation. Someone continues to speak, suggesting to John Doe that he wouldn't necessarily have lost in a different scenario. John Doe raises his hands, a slight blush on his cheeks, as he wryly reminds the blonde student that he's just a cripple after all, downplaying his own strength. John looks away with a troubled, resigned expression, a sweat drop on his cheek reflecting his internal struggle. John, flustered, raises his hand in a defensive gesture as Arlo continues to speak. John clenches his fist and turns away from Arlo, his posture suggesting a decisive end to their conversation. Arlo's eyes narrow sternly, almost contemptuously, as he calls John Doe a liar and accuses him of overselling his status. Moments later, Arlo's eyes narrow intensely and sternly as he presses John Doe, asking why he continues to deny. John Doe, with his messy black hair, turns his back, seemingly walking away as Arlo's words about being powerless continue to resonate. The school hallway stretches out empty, its purple lockers lining the wall, conveying the quiet aftermath of the intense conversation. At that moment, Ventus's intense expression, his eyes narrowed and looking tense, reflects the tension of the moment. The student nervously peeks from behind a wall, a sweat drop on his forehead, cautiously asking if the coast is clear. Ventus leans against the wall, hand pressed flat, contemplating how to avoid the situation. He needs to find a way to stay clear for the next week. Ventus fumes with bared teeth and an angry expression as Arlo calmly holds his arm, a faint blush on his cheeks. Arlo grimaces in clear discomfort as Gavin leans their head against his shoulder, causing him to blush and sweat. The boy shoves Ventus away with an intense, narrowed-eyed expression, while Ventus recoils in surprise, clearly dismissed by him. Blake's intense, narrowed eyes and perspiration showing convey his shock and rising tension. Arlo's eyes glow intensely, his expression stern and resolute as a powerful aura radiates from him. Moments later, Arlo's glowing eyes are intensely focused as he looks off, panel, seemingly deep in thought or conversation. Without warning, Arlo's eyes glow intensely, reflecting his stern resolve as he states he's dropping the story. At that moment, Arlo calmly proposes waiting for Serafina and abandoning the investigation, while the student on the left looks uneasy. Arlo stands with his back to us, while Ventus, with light brown hair, looks down, appearing deeply concerned. Arlo shoves Ventus, who recoils with a pained, surprised expression as the force of the impact hits him. Ventus, his eyes narrowed and perspiration showing, bites his lip in frustration, clearly overwhelmed. Arlo's spiky blonde hair frames his face as his blue eyes glow intensely, reflecting his stern and resolute expression. Then, Arlo's neck and jawline are highlighted, possibly in thought after his proposal. Without warning, Arlo's spiky blonde hair frames his face as his blue eyes glow intensely, maintaining a stern and focused expression. At that moment, Arlo's spiky blonde hair frames his face as his blue eyes glow intensely, maintaining a stern and focused expression. Ventus's eyes glow intensely orange, sweat drops on his forehead highlighting his distressed and focused expression. Then, Ventus is visibly shocked, his eyes glowing yellow as he falls backward, reacting to the intense confrontation with the other student. Arlo's intense eye glows with power as he considers the situation. Moments later, Ventus, sprawled on the ground, desperately yells for the boy to stop as he walks away, his back to the viewer. John stands in a school hallway, his messy black hair visible as he intently reads the papers he holds. John Doe sits under a harsh light, his messy hair framing a shadowed face as his hands are held firmly in a metallic restraint on the table. John's face is illuminated by a glow, his eyes narrowed and his brow furrowed in a serious, intense expression. John walks through the hallway, his messy black hair still obscuring his eyes as he passes Arlo, who carries a folder. John bumps into Arlo, sending his papers scattering as both look surprised and flustered by the collision. John, with a frustrated expression and furrowed brow, confronts Arlo in the hallway, his hand gesturing towards him. Still frustrated, John Doe kneels to gather the scattered papers from the floor, while the student stands nearby, observing. Without warning, Arlo, stern and with narrowed eyes, dismissively tells him that his presentation is pathetic. John Doe looks down, his face hidden by his messy black hair, a blush and sweat drop indicating his embarrassment as he holds the papers. Arlo's profile, his mouth set in a firm line, reacts to the confrontation. John Doe bends down, gathering the papers he dropped, looking confused as he amidst the scattered sheets. John's eyes widen in surprise, his mouth slightly agape, with a faint blush visible on his cheeks. John Doe turns his head away, his messy black hair falling over his eyes, as he processes the other's sarcastic remark with a neutral expression. John sheepishly holds the gathered papers, his eyes downcast, as Arlo continues to turn away from the awkward encounter. Still holding the scattered papers, John Doe looks towards Arlo, earnestly offering to pay him back for the mishap. Arlo looks away with a stern, almost irritated expression, a faint blush on his cheeks as he pauses in thought. John looks away with a subtle, knowing smile, his eyes reflecting a hint of amusement after Arlo's comment. Now, John Doe looks a bit flustered, a faint blush on his cheek, as he seemingly reacts to someone's words. John Doe continues to smile subtly as Arlo, holding a folded paper, looks down at it with an unreadable expression. Arlo turns to John Doe, his eyes wide with surprise and confusion, as he reacts to John Doe's unexpected question. John Doe stares intently at the blonde-haired student with a stern expression, his brow furrowed, as he remains partially visible on the right. A server takes John Doe's order for a large coffee, as Arlo waits beside him at the cafe. Serafina looks visibly distressed, her face tense as her eyes widen in concern. John Doe watches seriously, his brow slightly furrowed, his eyes focused intently as he continues his conversation with the other student. The server looks slightly flustered, smiling nervously as John Doe's hand offers her a document, while someone off panel calls out. John Doe reacts with a wide-eyed shout, a bead of sweat forming as he appears startled by something off panel. Arlo smirks subtly, his eyes narrowed slightly, as he waits at the cafe. Arlo takes a sip as he continues to wait patiently in the cafe. John Doe appears slightly unimpressed, while Arlo sips, remarking that it's not bad from off panel. John watches sternly, his eyes narrowed as he processes the unfolding situation. Arlo takes a sip, his eyes narrowed seriously as he continues to wait. John Doe's eyes are wide and focused, intently watching the unfolding news report on the TV screen. Arlo looks determined, his eyes narrowed, as he states that his dad has been teaching him his whole life. John Doe smiles gently, his eyes looking relaxed as he speaks, continuing the conversation. Arlo's serious expression is visible, his blue eye narrowed as he intently listens to the other student across the table. Then, Arlo, battered and bleeding, glares intensely at the calm, green-haired man who extends a hand, speaking about someone's immense power. John looks surprised, holding his bubble tea, as the boy abruptly stands up from the table. A hand slides a banknote across the table, as her speech bubble indicates she just remembered something urgent and needs to leave. John looks surprised, a hint of perspiration on his cheek, as he reacts to the ongoing conversation. John looks flustered, holding two bubble teas, as Arlo sits in the foreground with a thoughtful, almost stern expression. The student looks down, their hair highlighted by the light, seemingly deep in thought or reacting to the intense situation. With a pencil in hand, the student writes intently, while another hand anxiously crinkles a sheet of paper. A hand quickly snatches a book from a surface, the swift action highlighted by dynamic speed lines. Remy powerfully extends her glowing arm, unleashing an attack with intense speed and focus. Her eyes glow intensely blue, her expression serious and focused, as she prepares for what's to come in the tense situation. Ventus looks forward with a serious expression, his eyes reflecting the light, as he appears to be listening intently. She looks forward with a stern, determined expression, her eyes narrowed slightly. Blake looks towards Ventus, who appears flustered and surprised, with sweat drop lines indicating his nervousness. Blake looks surprised, a sweat drop forming as a hand offers him several tickets, presumably for an event. Arlo confidently points a finger upwards, sharing his thoughts on romance with Blake, who listens intently. Blake smiles subtly towards the boy, who stares forward intently. Remy offers a gentle, closed, "I smile" as she approaches two male students from behind. A beat later, Remy smiles gently, her pink hair framing her face, as she encourages everyone to get going. Blake stares with intense frustration and embarrassment, a sweat drop forming as his cheeks flush. A beat later, Blake looks flustered, blushing and sweating, while Remy bounces a small red ball in the background, seemingly oblivious to his discomfort. Remy skillfully spins a red ball on her finger, a subtle smile playing on her lips as she concentrates on the trick. At that moment, Remy holds the red ball with a determined expression, speed lines emphasizing her powerful action as she prepares to throw it. Blake's frustration is evident, a bead of sweat on his cheek, his brow furrowed in a tense expression. Two students face each other, taking a ready stance, perhaps preparing for a game or a friendly spar. Blake reacts with a pained wince, his face flushing as he appears to be hit or intensely surprised by something. The girl lunges forward, attempting to catch something that the boy just tossed, missing it. Remy delivers a powerful, glowing strike, sending Blake sprawling across the floor. Ventus's face is a mask of intense frustration and anger, with sweat beading on his forehead as his eyes glow with fierce determination. Then, Ventus is startled, recoiling as a red ball hits his head. John Doe scolds him for taking too long to make a decision. Without warning, the boy blushes deeply, confessing his long-held love to Remy, saying he's always been in love with them. Remy's face is streaked with tears, her expression one of deep sorrow and distress as she cries. The boy leans in close to Cecile, gently cupping her face as both blush, seemingly on the verge of a kiss. Blake looks annoyed, while Remy appears tearful, clasping her hands. The boy openly weeps, holding popcorn, as they react to a romantic scene. Without warning, Remy maintains a calm smile between a surprised Blake, who has a sweat drop, and a casually grinning Arlo. Blake watches sternly, slightly annoyed, his eyes narrowed, as he processes the situation. Remy hums happily as she walks, while Blake points animatedly with a suggestion, and the boy follows beside them, looking on. Ventus looks surprised, his mouth slightly open and a finger raised, as Cecile's red hair is visible close by, suggesting they are in conversation. Remy bows her head, deep in thought, as Blake and Ventus stand behind her, observing the moment. The boy with blonde hair and Blake watch intently as Remy walks away, her distinctive pink hair tied back with a bow. Blake smirks confidently with gleaming eyes, while the boy points and agrees to their plan, confirming he will drag her over. The boy pulls Remy. Blake gives a stern thumbs up gesture, his eyes serious, while Ventus continues to pull a surprised Remy away by her arm. Ventus smiles slightly, while Remy, with a stern expression, gives a thumbs up, seemingly agreeing to something reluctantly. Remy stands flustered and sparkling, as Ventus and Blake react with wide-eyed surprise and admiration, seemingly in a clothing store. Then, Remy's eyes widen, and a bead of sweat appears on her cheek, showing her clear surprise and apprehension after being pulled away. Ventus smiles, gesturing with his hand toward Remy, who stands partially visible in her white tank top, seemingly addressed by him. Remy's hand is now firmly clasped by Blake's, their fingers intertwining in a significant moment. Two hands are shown holding each other. Remy looks confused, holding a brown garment, while Blake and Holden observe her in what appears to be a clothing store. Blake wears a slight, confident smirk, his eyes still glowing with an intense focus. Ventus smiles, placing his hand on Remy's head, while Blake also rests his hand there. Remy looks utterly exasperated by their actions. Without warning, Ventus laughs heartily, his mouth open, while Remy remains in the foreground, her pink hair with a bow visible from behind. Then, Blake's face is filled with intense focus or anger, his eyes narrowed and a bead of sweat visible on his cheek. A beat later, Blake's intense gaze shifts, now with a noticeable blush across his cheeks, as he looks towards Remy, whose pink hair is partially visible. Without warning, Blake, still blushing, gently pats Remy on the shoulder as she holds the brown teddy bear, with another student partially visible beside them. Remy carefully reveals a glowing green chip hidden within the teddy bear's torn back, her hands meticulously working. Blake stares intently, a blush still visible on his cheeks, while Holden also watches seriously. With an eye patch covering one eye, John Doe looks on with a surprised and slightly uncomfortable expression, a bead of sweat on their cheek. A hand slams down on the table with force, startling Holden seated opposite, who reacts with a wide-eyed, shocked expression. Ventus and Blake glare intensely, their eyes glowing with power, as a worried Remy stands behind them. They look down at John Doe below. Remy, with an intense and serious expression, holds up a small, green, patterned square, questioning its meaning. Blake's arm is abruptly grabbed, making him flinch with a pained expression. John Doe, with a tense expression, raises his hand as he firmly tells Serafina that they heard her. His eye glows intensely red, his gaze sharp and focused, as he activates his power in response to the attack. Remy looks serious while Blake, with glowing eyes, gazes to the side in what appears to be a clothing store. Blake and the girl with pink hair observe the scene. Then, Blake looks deeply distressed and sweats nervously, his eyes wide with worry as he tries to explain something. A beat later, Blake flinches in pain as his arm is firmly grabbed, while the unseen person holding him asks to talk things over. Arlo glares intensely, his hair framing a stern face and glowing eye, as he remains silent. At that moment, Arlo glares intensely, his hair framing a stern face and glowing eye, as he remains silent. His chest is shown, with a glowing heart targeted by a reticle, hinting at a focus on his vital signs. Blake's mouth is tightly set and a bead of sweat rolls down his cheek, showing his continued distress from the situation. John Doe's eyes glow with intense determination as he insists they come along, while Remy stands stoically behind him. Ventus clenches his arm, his mouth slightly agape, perspiration on his cheek highlighting his visible distress. A smoke grenade, clearly labeled, lands firmly on the ground, its pin still in place, indicating it's about to be deployed or has just been thrown. Amidst the smoke, the boy lands a forceful blow on Blake, his eyes glowing intensely as Remy stands partially visible nearby with her teddy bear. Ventus's eye glows with intense power, his brow furrowed and a sweat drop visible, reflecting his strained focus in the tense moment. The student covers his mouth and nose, looking overwhelmed by the smoke, as a hand gently taps his shoulder. Without warning, the student dashes forward, speed lines and smoke emphasizing their rapid movement, with a red belt visible around their waist. As smoke billows around them, Remy covers her mouth, Ventus looks startled, and Blake glares furiously with glowing eyes. Blake extends his arm, which glows intensely with red energy, as a bead of sweat rolls down his face, showing his strenuous effort. Then, Blake's face contorts with intense determination, his eyes glowing fiercely as red energy surges around his head, ready for impact. A beat later, Blake unleashes a massive, blinding red energy blast from his hands, pushing back surrounding figures with immense force. Ventus listens intently, his expression unreadable as Blake confirms their earlier action with a simple, "Yeah." Arlo stares intensely forward, his eyes glowing brightly, a bead of sweat visible on his brow. Blake, now a glowing red figure, dashes through the distorted hallway as other people flee in panic, while Elaine rushes forward in the foreground. Remy shoves Blake back with an outstretched hand, both moving rapidly with speed lines, as Blake looks surprised. At that moment, Remy's eyes are sharply focused, her hair flowing with speed lines, showing rapid movement or intense concentration. A uniformed officer grimaces, looking back as a powerful blast sends debris flying, blurring the background with intense motion. Arlo's face contorts in intense shock, his eyes wide, a tense expression as he reacts. Remy, with a determined expression, races forward, her pink hair flowing as Blake and Ventus follow close behind her. Ventus turns sharply with a wide-eyed, shocked expression, perspiration on his face as he reacts to something off panel. Arlo, looking furious, holds a walkie-talkie and shouts into it, requesting backup as the situation escalates. Remy, Blake, and Ventus sprint away from the viewer, kicking up dust as they escape what appears to be a smoke bomb. Remy leads the way, leaning forward with purpose, as Blake and the boy walk alongside her across the wide, sunlit steps. Arlo's eyes glow intensely, his brow furrowed in a fierce, determined expression as he focuses on the escalating situation. Remy, as Blake points with a glowing finger across the busy parking lot towards a distant target. An orange motorcycle speeds rapidly away from the viewer, its wheels blurring with motion as it travels down the road. Ventus sprints away from the viewer, his thoughts focused on the possibility of an accomplice as he navigates the urban environment. Remy, her hair flowing with a determined expression, her eyes focused intently as she moves rapidly. John Doe looks intently forward, a bead of sweat on his cheek as a loud honk sounds. Ventus turns sharply, a bead of sweat on his face, looking startled as a blurry figure and urgent red text appear in the background. John Doe grits his teeth, eyes wide with focus as he reacts to an unseen threat or impact. An arm and torso blur with intense speed, caught in a powerful red force as a sudden impact occurs. A speeding red car collides with Arlo, sending him reeling as Remy races towards the unfolding accident. His legs blur with motion as he executes a rapid slide across the ground. Ventus desperately pushes against the side of a large red truck, his face strained with effort and worry as it continues to move. Arlo closes his eyes in concentration or exhaustion, sweat beading on his face as his hand rests on a red surface. As Blake lands on the truck's roof, John Doe looks up from the ground, visibly enraged by his actions. Blake's hair frames his face as his eyes glow with intense determination, ready for action. Seraphina's eyes glow with intense determination as her ability activates, while Blake remains on the building's edge. Blake, his eyes glowing yellow, unleashes a powerful red energy blast from his core, channeling his ability with intense focus. The large red truck continues its movement as the student stands beside it, while Arlo observes the scene from the foreground, surrounded by energy. Arlo yells intensely, his eyes wide with anger, perspiration showing as he reacts to the situation. Blake, with a determined and strained expression, looks forward intently, a bead of sweat on his face, reacting to the unfolding situation. Moments later, Blake's eyes glow golden with intense focus, a bead of sweat on his temple as he unleashes a powerful red energy blast. Seraphina moves at incredible speed, her legs blurring with motion as blue lightning crackles around her, leaving the streetlights behind. Remy's pink hair and glowing orange eyes show her intense focus as blue electrical energy crackles around her, activating her powerful ability. Without warning, Remy races down the street, enveloped in crackling blue electrical energy, seen from the perspective of a nearby vehicle. At that moment, Remy's pink hair and neck are enveloped in crackling blue energy, indicating she's activating her ability. Blue electrical energy crackles intensely around the student's moving limb, generating powerful force and speed. A beat later, blue energy surges across the scene, emanating from a motorcycle on the left and a distant figure on the right, creating a powerful electrical field. Blake is violently slammed onto the asphalt, blue lightning crackling around him as he hits the ground. Seraphina speeds down the road, her body enveloped in crackling blue energy, leaving Blake partially visible in the foreground. The brown-haired figure lies prone on the asphalt, crackling with blue energy while the helmeted individual clutches their injured chest, groaning in pain. Remy's eyes glow intensely as blue lightning crackles around her, a determined expression on her face. She asserts there's nowhere to run. Seraphina's eyes glow intensely, and blue electrical energy crackles around her as she clenches her jaw, demanding answers with a furious expression. Remy's eyes glow orange with intense shock and distress as blue electrical energy crackles around her head. Blue electrical energy violently surges around the boy, whose face contorts in shock and pain from the intense impact. The girl, with a strained expression, desperately tries to support the boy slumped on the asphalt, clearly injured from the recent impact. A beat later, the girl remains unconscious, slumped against someone, showing scratches on her face after the intense impact. Her wide, distressed eyes are fixed on something off-panel, sweat beading on her face as she processes the intense situation. Elaine cries out in terror as the motorcycle skids violently on the asphalt, near where John Doe lies injured. Remy stands protectively over John Doe, her pink hair flowing and eyes glowing fiercely as she prepares to defend them.